Under the glare of live TV lights, Ivanka Trump leaned in with a rehearsed smile, until Jasmine Crockett slid a folder across the desk. Hotel names, dates. Officially. The room went still. "Shall I read them out loud?" Crockett asked. Ivanka's expression shattered. What happened next silenced the entire nation. "Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow." The studio lights burned bright, catching the gleam of Ivanka Trump's diamond earrings as she leaned forward in her chair. Her tone was effortless, measured, the kind of polished calm that had carried her through countless interviews. "These are nothing more than baseless rumors," she said, brushing off the host's question about circulating stories with the same grace she used when promoting a new product line. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett didn't move at first. She listened, hands folded neatly, eyes fixed on Ivanka as if studying the cadence of her voice. Then, without raising her tone, she reached for a manila folder. The quiet slide of its cover against the glass table was louder than any shout. Crockett placed it squarely between them, her fingertips resting lightly on top. The host's gaze darted down, catching sight of the tabbed pages. In the control room, producers leaned toward their monitors, mouths half open. The cameras held their shots. No one dared cut away. Slowly, Crockett drew a single sheet halfway into view, a list, hotel names, dates, room numbers, and sets of initials in neat typed columns, glared under the studio lights. Ivanka's practiced smile faltered. "What exactly are you implying?" she asked, her voice low but edged. Crockett didn't blink. "I'm not implying," she said, her voice deliberate and unshakable. "I'm reading from sworn affidavits." A murmur swept through the audience. One guest shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another tightened her grip on a notepad. The air felt heavier, charged. The host began to speak, but his words drowned beneath the thrum of silence that followed Crockett's statement. Ivanka leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, trying to reassemble her composure. "That's a private matter," she said finally, each syllable clipped. Crockett's reply was almost soft, but it cut through the room like glass. "Not when it involves public trust, public money, and a sitting president." The control room scrambled, voices overlapping as the director barked, "Go to break, now." The studio lights dimmed for a commercial cut, but nothing cooled the tension. Off camera, Ivanka's jaw tightened. Crockett's hand remained on the folder, and the audience sat in an unblinking stare. Everyone knew they'd just witnessed the spark that would ignite a political firestream. For years, Ivanka Trump cultivated a public image as a rare fusion of corporate sophistication and political elegance, part boardroom power broker, part first daughter. The world saw her in curated photo ops, walking a tightrope between political influence and lifestyle branding. Her wardrobe was impeccable, her manner deliberate, her speech modulated to avoid even the faintest hint of controversy. In every appearance, she embodied the political princess aura, polished, aspirational, and untouchable. Her tenure as senior advisor to the president, during her father's administration, cemented that image on the global stage. Ivanka became the public face of the administration's women's empowerment initiatives, appearing at international summits, economic forums, and charity events. She spoke fluently about entrepreneurship, opportunity, and the need to elevate women in business. Each appearance was carefully orchestrated, a flawless dress, a refined gesture, and a talking point that connected her father's policies to a vision of upward mobility. In private, colleagues described her as exacting, someone who insisted on multiple drafts of every speech and would rehearse answers to potential questions before stepping in front of a camera. She treated interviews like strategic chess matches, anticipating every possible move from her opponent. It was why her composure had never cracked in public, even under the most aggressive questioning. For Ivanka, losing control was not an option. Yet, high society has a way of whispering behind closed doors. For all her control over her image, Ivanka could not fully silence the hum of speculation. Washington salons and Manhattan galas alike murmured about dinners with unusual guest lists, whispered encounters at charity balls, and unexplained absences from certain events. None of it ever stuck in the press, Not because the rumors lacked detail, but because no one had dared to place concrete proof in the public record. This was Ivanka's armor, the absence of verified evidence. Her critics might hint, but they could never point to sworn documents or corroborated testimony. Without receipts, allegations dissolved in the glow of her curated brand. That was the unspoken rule she operated under. Until Jasmine Crockett's folder landed on that table. In a career built on precision and polish, the mere existence of paper evidence was more dangerous than any shouted accusation. For the first time, Ivanka's silence might not be enough to bury a story. The question was whether her legendary self-control could withstand the kind of exposure that affidavits and dated records represented. Jasmine Crockett's path to Congress was paved not by family legacy or inherited influence, but by courtroom battles fought on behalf of people whose names rarely made headlines. As a civil rights attorney, she built her reputation on meticulous preparation and an unshakable command of the facts. Her style was never theatrical. She did not pound tables or speak in sweeping slogans. Instead, she let documentation do the heavy lifting. Every claim she made was backed by a case file, a deposition, or a signed affidavit. That commitment carried over into her political career. When Crockett entered Congress, she quickly became known for her discipline during hearings, waiting for witnesses to finish, letting silence hang, and then delivering questions that landed like precision strikes. She did not chase viral moments for their own sake. When her exchanges did go viral, it was because they revealed something undeniable. Her core belief was simple: personal conduct matters in public service when it intersects with official power. In Crockett's view, leaders cannot separate who they are in private from the responsibilities they hold in public if those private actions create conflicts of interest or misuse taxpayer resources. This principle made her a fierce watchdog in an era when the line between public office and private gain often blurred. Her strategy was as straightforward as it was effective. Never raise your voice. Raise your proof. In an age when political debates often devolved into shouting matches, Crockett understood that the sharpest weapon was not volume, but verifiable evidence. She knew the psychological weight of a document slid across a table, the way an audience shifts when confronted with hard records instead of hypotheticals. This wasn't the first time she had brought paperwork into a high-stakes arena. As a freshman Congresswoman, she had once dismantled a corporate executive's testimony by producing a single page of internal emails that contradicted his statements. The move made headlines, but more importantly, it established her as someone who could not be bluffed or intimidated. When Crockett agreed to appear on the primetime talk show opposite Ivanka Trump, she didn't arrive looking for confrontation. But she did arrive prepared. The folder she carried was not a prop. It was the result of weeks of quiet investigation, verification, and legal vetting. She knew what was in it. She knew what it meant. And she knew that in one decisive moment, it could strip away the layers of brand protection that had shielded Ivanka for years. For Crockett, the goal was not humiliation, it was accountability, the same standard she would apply to anyone in public service. But she also understood the gravity of what she was about to do. This wasn't just another interview. This was the moment where her ethos, facts first, proof over posture, would be tested in the brightest spotlight of her career. The set of the primetime political talk show glimmered beneath the bright overhead lights, cameras angled perfectly to capture every polished movement. The host leaned in with the kind of warm, practiced smile that guests knew well, a visual cue that this next question would be friendly, even flattering. Given all the controversy swirling around our political climate, he began, his voice smooth. How do you see ethics shaping the future of public service? Ivanka Trump, in a cream-colored sheathed dress and diamond studs, didn't miss a beat. Her posture remained perfect, hands folded lightly in her lap as she turned toward the audience. I think it's vital, she said with a measured cadence, to rise above the constant barrage of media smears and focus on the good work being done. In today's world, a woman in the public eye is an easy target for baseless gossip. She allowed herself a faint, knowing smile, as if inviting the audience into her confidence. The smile hung in the air, but only for a moment. Jasmine Crockett shifted slightly in her seat, leaning forward just enough to signal she had something to say. Her tone was calm, measured, without a trace of hostility. Would you say the same, she asked, if evidence showed misuse of office for personal benefit? The words were not shouted, not even sharp, but they landed like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples were immediate. The host's brows drew together, his rehearsed smile faltering for the first time all evening. In the audience, a low rustle of movement and whispers broke the stillness. Ivanka's lips parted, then curved into a small, dismissive laugh. "Well," she replied, "I'm not in the business of entertaining hypotheticals, especially from people who may have their own agendas." She cast a quick glance toward the cameras, her expression light, almost amused. The audience, however, did not join in her laughter. Their silence was heavy, the kind that suggested they were waiting for more. A flicker, barely visible, passed across Ivanka's face, the faintest sign of annoyance or unease. Crockett didn't press. She simply folded her hands and let the question hang in the air, unanswered, its weight growing with each passing second. The moment stretched. The host, sensing the tension, tried to pivot to a softer topic, but his delivery lacked its earlier ease. For Ivanka, the segment had shifted without warning, from a platform to promote her brand to a space where her composure might be tested. For Crockett, it was only the opening move. The real confrontation had not yet begun. The host barely managed to steer the conversation toward policy priorities before Crockett made her next move. She reached for the manila folder resting at her side, her fingers deliberate, the gesture unhurried. Every camera in the studio seemed to follow that motion, knowing instinctively that whatever was inside would matter. She set the folder on the glass table between them. The faint thud cut through the studio's ambient hum. Without glancing at the host, she flipped it open, revealing neatly tabbed pages, each marked with dates, hotel names, and initials written in clean black ink. The front page slid halfway into view, enough for the cameras to catch fragments, a timeline, columns of data, a few bolded entries. Where country was. "Congresswoman," the host began cautiously, "what is this?" Crockett didn't raise her voice. "These," she said evenly, "are sworn affidavits documenting travel arrangements, accommodations, and meetings between Ms. Trump and the former president, meetings not listed on any official White House schedule." A collective inhale swept through the audience. The host froze mid-sentence. Ivanka's head snapped toward Crockett. "That's disgusting," she said sharply, her tone losing the earlier velvet polish. Her hands tightened around the edges of her chair's armrests. Crockett didn't flinch. "What's disgusting," she replied, "is the breach of public trust. When personal relationships and public duties mix, especially when taxpayer dollars are involved." She flipped to another tab, scanning lines with the precision of someone reading from a deposition. Ivanka leaned forward now, her voice rising. "These are fabricated, politically motivated lies. I've dealt with this kind of nonsense my entire life." In the control room, producers exchanged frantic glances. On screen, the split-screen view caught every twitch of Ivanka's jaw, every deliberate stillness in Crockett's posture. The audience shifted uncomfortably, torn between curiosity and disbelief. A few heads turned toward the big monitors overhead, watching the scene as it played in real time, perhaps hoping the close-ups would reveal something more. A crack in one of them. Crockett turned one page, then another. "According to these records, there were at least 4 occasions in which the official itinerary was altered within 24 hours, coinciding with private stays in locations where both your names appear on the guest logs." She let the words hang, her tone clinical, absent of stating the temperature in the room. Ivanka's knuckles whitened. "I will not be ambushed on national television," she shot back. But the tremor in her voice was not lost on anyone. The audience didn't applaud, didn't boo. They simply listened, and the silence was louder than any outburst could have been. The room was tilting, and Crockett knew it. The table between them might as well have been a witness stand now. Crockett closed the folder halfway, her palm resting on its cover, and locked eyes with Ivanka. The stillness was intentional. The pause before the verdict. "I'll stop reading," Crockett said, her voice low but carrying, "when you tell me which part is untrue." The air tightened. Even the studio lights felt sharper. For a heartbeat, Ivanka didn't answer. She glanced toward the host, toward the cameras, toward the silent audience, as if any of them might hand her a lifeline. None came. Finally, she leaned back, crossing her arms. "This is beneath the dignity of this forum," she said, though the confidence from earlier had drained from her tone. Crockett didn't let the opening slip. "If dignity means ignoring evidence, then the public deserves to know where you draw that line, especially when it crosses into matters of state and taxpayer money." Her words were measured, deliberate, the cadence of a closing argument. Ivanka's lips pressed into a thin smile. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, aiming for dismissive but landing closer to defensive. "That's the thing," Crockett replied, leaning forward now. "I do. And the public will too, once these records are reviewed independently. That's why I brought them here. Not to humiliate you, but to make sure the truth isn't hidden in some locked drawer." A murmur ran through the audience. The cameras caught every shift in body language. Crockett's calm certainty against Ivanka's tightening jaw. Ivanka tried a different tactic, pivoting away from the facts. "I'm not surprised you'd resort to personal attacks when your own record is thin," she said. The words carried a sharp edge, an attempt to wound. But the reaction wasn't what she'd hoped for. A wave of unease rippled through the audience. Some exchanged glances, others shook their heads. The attack felt off balance. A reach. Crockett didn't take the bait. "The truth doesn't need my volume," she said evenly. "It speaks for itself." She slid the folder toward the host, her hand lifting from it like a prosecutor passing an exhibit to the judge. The host hesitated, then placed his hand on the folder, the weight of the moment settling in. Ivanka shifted again in her seat, her practiced smile gone entirely now. She had no closing statement, no clean retreat. Crockett leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "Let's move on," she said softly, but the damage was done. The balance of the room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. For the first time that night, Ivanka wasn't controlling the frame. The segment hadn't even finished airing before the first clips began tearing through social media. In living rooms, coffee shops, and dorm lounges, people weren't just watching, they were replaying, dissecting, and looping the exchange until it became impossible to scroll without seeing it. The "I'll stop reading when you tell me which part is untrue" moment hit hardest. Users clipped it into 10-second bursts, pairing it with captions like "receipts." VM's deflection, and when the folder lands, lies fall. It became the anchor in a wave of supercuts, always paired with the split-screen image. Ivanka mid-re-recoil, Crockett steady as stone. On cable news, the coverage split down familiar lines but with an unexpected twist. Networks that usually gave Ivanka friendly framing had trouble defending the optics. The raw footage showed too much, the shifting eyes, the failed pivots, the stutter between words. Even sympathetic hosts had to acknowledge Crockett's precision and restraint. On other networks, the exchange was treated as a masterclass in political confrontation, with analysts replaying the moment in slow motion, highlighting the silence after Crockett's challenge as the kind of pause that ends careers. Podcasts dropped emergency episodes titled things like "The Folder Heard Round the Beltway." Political talk radio opened their phone lines, and callers, whether they liked Crockett's politics or not, admitted the composure she held under pressure was rare. One caller summed it up bluntly: "I don't care who you vote for. That's how you handle someone dodging questions. You corner them with facts and keep calm." In the print world, op-eds began surfacing within hours. Major papers ran side-by-side opinion pieces. A calculated strike on live TV and why Ivanka's defense fell flat. Reporters noted that Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't embellish, and never once personalized the attack beyond the scope of the evidence. "It wasn't a brawl," one columnist wrote. "It was surgery." On the digital front, hashtags trended globally: "The Folder," "Tell Us Which Part," and "Truth on Air." TikTok creators remixed the moment into mock debate training videos. College civics professors used the clip as a modern case study in fact-based questioning, contrasting it with examples of empty rhetoric. Even late-night comedians couldn't resist, running skits where fictional politicians begged the host to please, for the love of God, cut to commercial before she brings out the folder. Inside newsrooms, producers noticed the data spike. Segments featuring Crockett's calm demeanor consistently outperformed others in engagement metrics. It wasn't just her line that resonated. It was the visual juxtaposition of calm authority versus visible discomfort. Analysts called it the optics war, won in under 5 minutes. Behind the scenes, media bookers scrambled to secure Crockett for follow-up interviews. Some with straightforward invitations for morning shows and Sunday panels. Others were subtler, couched as continuing the conversation on political ethics. Crockett's team declined most, opting instead to let the moment breathe. The refusal only amplified public curiosity. Meanwhile, Ivanka's media allies tried damage control. Carefully crafted claims effaced our affairs and unfounded allegations, but the internet had already seized on the specifics, dates, hotels, initials, and was collectively fact-checking them against travel records and public schedules. Each new post felt like a mini-investigation, and each unanswered question deepened the sense that Crockett's folder might not even be the whole story. By the week's end, the moment wasn't just a headline. It was a cultural marker. People didn't say, "Did you see the interview?" They said, "Did you see the folder?" And in every retelling, the sequence stayed the same. The slide of paper into frame, the question that froze the air, and the unshakable voice that followed. By Monday morning, the divide was unmistakable. What had started as a flashpoint on live television was now a litmus test running straight through the Democratic base, the political center, and even parts of the Republican electorate. Everyone had seen the clip. But what they took from it depended on what they valued most: decorum or candor. Among voters over 50, the conversation leaned toward tone. Call-in shows and Facebook threads were filled with comments like, "I agree with holding people accountable, but that was not the place," or, "There's a right way to address these things, and it's not ambushing someone on live TV." For them, Crockett's precision was overshadowed by the breach of what they considered professional courtesy. In political clubs and donor circles, the refrain was almost identical. The facts might matter, but so does keeping disputes in the family. Under 35, the reaction couldn't have been more different. On Instagram stories, Reddit threads, and campus group chats, Crockett's calm dismantling of Ivanka's talking points was being hailed as a turning point. "She didn't just win the moment, she rewrote the rules," one viral tweet read. Young organizers argued that this was the exact kind of transparency politics needed, unsanitized, fact-forward, and unwilling to let polished rhetoric smother hard truths. The folder became a metaphor in their circles, a stand-in for all the receipts they felt their generation carried but rarely got to present. Think pieces poured in, framing the confrontation as more than a personality clash. Headlines read, "Brand versus base. The new intra-party divide, when public trust meets private conduct, and receipts over relationships." The story was no longer just about Crockett and Ivanka. It had become a debate over the soul of political discourse itself. Was the priority to preserve unity at all costs, or to challenge leaders when the public's trust was on the line? Crockett's own strategy during this split was telling. She did not flood the airwaves or make the rounds on every panel. Instead, she posted exactly twice on her official channels. The first was a simple video clip of the moment, captioned only with, "Accountability is not disrespect." The second, a week later, was 2 side-by-side charts, one showing rent inflation over the past 5 years, the other showing the wealth growth of political families tied to federal contracts. The caption read, "Same voters, same months, different priorities." Ivanka's camp leaned heavily into privacy and dignity language, releasing statements that framed Crockett's actions as politically motivated attacks and an attempt to distract from real issues. They found sympathetic ears among some donors and political veterans, but the defensive posture only reinforced the perception, especially among younger voters, that substance was being dodged. Cable segments continued to run split-screen debates, pairing a veteran strategist arguing for unity against a grassroots activist insisting that unity without accountability was hollow. On the street, activists printed T-shirts with Crockett's line, "Tell me which part is untrue," and sold them to fund voter registration drives. Even late-night hosts picked sides. Some mocked the confrontation as daytime drama in prime time, while others lauded it as the only time a folder has done more damage than a filibuster. By the end of the second week, the split was no longer just generational, it was philosophical. The confrontation had forced a question into the bloodstream of the party and the public. Is political unity worth preserving if it requires leaving truths in sealed envelopes? Inside political institutions, the confrontation didn't fade. It calcified into a new reference point. In closed-door meetings, staffers spoke of the folder moment as shorthand for when controlled environments are pierced by inconvenient facts. Leaders who once prided themselves on message discipline began quietly revisiting their playbooks, asking, how do we prevent this from happening to us? And what if it should? Donor circles felt the tremor first. High-dollar fundraisers that once revolved around photo ops and talking points began fielding sharper questions. Where's the policy impact? One donor pressed at a reception for a senior senator. What have you delivered since the last time I wrote a check? That shift wasn't accidental. It was a direct echo of Crockett's framing. Political finance operatives started warning candidates that access-only pitches were losing their shine. Without a tangible legislative or economic win to pair with the message, contributions were slowing. Within the Congressional Black Caucus, the reaction was studied. Publicly, statements leaned neutral, praising both women for their service, urging focus on shared goals. Privately, several members expressed quiet admiration for Crockett's restraint under fire. In strategy sessions, her ability to control the tempo of a heated exchange became a case study. Senior aides clipped the transcript highlighting how she transitioned from accusation to documented proof without losing composure. Party leadership, while wary of the media storm, began absorbing the lesson in structural ways. Future party summits were retooled to require each keynote to pair messaging with a policy deliverable, not just a slogan or rallying cry. Communications directors were instructed to prepare receipts decks for principal speakers, anticipating challenges that might arise from the floor or during Q&A. Even the think tank world took note. Policy institutes began organizing panels under the theme, From Message to Material, citing the confrontation as proof that the public appetite had shifted toward proof-of-delivery politics. Internal memos at one major advocacy group recommended adopting Crockett's question trees, a method of forcing policy proposals through real-world application scenarios before presenting them publicly. Media consultants reworked their training regimens. Candidates preparing for interviews were now drilled on bridging back to evidence rather than relying solely on broad values language. Some resisted, arguing that too much focus on granular proof could drain the emotional lift from speeches. But others embraced it, seeing it as a necessary evolution in a skeptical age. Ive's own network scrambled to shore up credibility. Appearances were carefully stage-managed, with no unscripted audience questions. Allies attempted to reframe her image through charity events and selective interviews, but the aftertaste lingered. Even sympathetic outlets found it difficult to cover her without referencing the folder. The moment had become an unavoidable footnote in her profile. By the end of the quarter, the institutional ripple was measurable. Donor pledges were increasingly tied to performance metrics. Advocacy groups were cross-training their comms teams with policy staff. Intra-party debates, once insulated, were beginning to play out with more transparency, not because everyone welcomed it, but because no one wanted to be blindsided on camera. Crockett, without gloating, kept moving. She didn't spike the football. She let the institutional changes speak for themselves. In a private debrief with her staff, she summed it up in one sentence. If you want to keep the room, you have to respect the people in it enough to show them the proof. That, more than the folder itself, became the legacy of the moment. The clip didn't just circulate, it detonated. Within hours, the moment was clipped into tight, shareable loops. Crockett sliding the manila folder across the table, Ivanka's smile faltering, the single line, "I'll stop reading when you tell me which part is untrue." On TikTok, creators layered the exchange over trending audio, framing it as the ultimate example of calm, dismantling arrogance. Twitter threads unpacked the affidavits glimpsed on screen, with amateur sleuths free-framing to identify dates and locations. Memes exploded across every platform. The simplest was just a white background with bold black letters. "No, Jasmine Crockett." Others fused politics and pop culture, superimposing Crockett's still frame over courtroom dramas or editing Ivanka's reaction into a slow zoom with dramatic strings. On Instagram, activism pages turned to quote, "Democracy isn't just access, it's outcome," into shareable infographics, pairing it with statistics on political accountability. Cable networks ran the clip on repeat, each network spinning its own angle. Left-leaning commentators framed it as a long-overdue check on political privilege. Conservative pundits decried it as personal attacks disguised as oversight, but the repetition only amplified the imagery. Crockett steady, Ivanka visibly rattled. The visual contrast was irresistible to producers, and the rating spikes confirmed its draw. The cultural wave took shape. At universities, student debate teams adopted the folder case as a mock trial exercise, dissecting not just the content, but the composure. At community centers, activists ran workshops titled From Proof to Power, using Crockett's strategy as a model for confronting misinformation or obfuscation in public forums. Libraries organized civic engagement nights where the confrontation was screened before discussions on transparency and leadership. Even late-night comedians weighed in, replaying the clip with exaggerated voiceovers. But beneath the humor, they recognized the weight of the moment. A politician refusing to back down when faced with intimidation wrapped in politeness. Merch makers moved fast, printing t-shirts, mugs, and stickers with the word "no" in Crockett's typeface from the show's chyron. The most telling impact came from unexpected corners. Text chains between politically disengaged 20-somethings suddenly lit up with links to the video. "Who is she?" became a common question, followed quickly by, "What else has she done?" For many, this was their first introduction to Crockett, and it was memorable. Polling firms later reported a measurable spike in her name recognition among voters under 35. In a media ecosystem saturated with noise, this moment broke through because it compressed a year's worth of political frustration into 30 unshakable seconds. Crockett didn't just win an argument. She imprinted an image, one that would be replayed, remixed, and remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The political establishment reacted with the same mix of fascination and unease that always follows a public breach in the carefully managed veneer of power. Invitations began pouring into Jasmine Crockett's office within 48 hours. Economic democracy panels, labor town halls, youth voter forums, all wanted the Congresswoman whose calm delivery had rattled a Trump on live television. Organizers pitched her not as a firebrand, but as proof that precision could outmatch. Progressive advocacy groups saw opportunity. They began building entire events around the theme, "Receipts over Rhetoric," with Crockett as the keynote speaker. Union leaders, impressed by her refusal to be derailed by Ivanka's personal attacks, invited her to address national conventions. Even some centrist organizations, normally hesitant to court controversy, reached out privately, curious about her strategy for proof-driven persuasion. Meanwhile, Ivanka Trump faced a very different wave. The networks that had once eagerly booked her for soft-focus interviews now carried segments dissecting the folder moment frame by frame. Morning shows, even on friendly networks, asked sharper questions about her activities. Donor circles, while not abandoning her outright, began pressing for more transparency. A few high-profile backers were blunt. "If the story is false, prove it. If it's true, explain it." Inside political consulting firms, memos circulated about the risks of underestimating opponents who come armed with hard documentation. One prominent strategist wrote, "In the age of viral confrontation, the burden isn't on the accuser to shout louder. It's on the accused to survive the replay." Training sessions began to include scenarios modeled after Crockett's performance, teaching candidates how to stay composed under document-based scrutiny. The shock waves extended to media production as well. Producers quietly adjusted booking strategies, weighing the potential for combustible matchups against the reputational cost if their preferred guest lost control. The Crockett-Ivade exchange became a case study in multiple journalism schools, illustrating how live television can shift from staged discussion to historic reckoning in under a minute. Perhaps the most lasting fallout, however, was the recalibration of credibility politics. Viewers had watched a high-profile figure fold under the weight of specifics, and they had also seen a less famous but prepared opponent emerge stronger. The moment challenged the unspoken hierarchy that charisma and connections could shield someone indefinitely from consequence. By the end of the month, Crockett's office had doubled its staff for handling public inquiries. Ivanka, for her part, canceled several planned appearances, citing scheduling conflicts, while insiders whispered about her reluctance to risk another unpredictable exchange. The political industry had absorbed the lesson. In an era where every second can be clipped, captioned, and shared globally, the winner isn't always the loudest voice. Sometimes it's the one holding the folder. Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly toward the camera, her voice steady, her expression unshaken by the whirlwind that had followed the broadcast. "You can't run government like a brand caning," she said, her tone crisp but not cruel. "Facts matter. Accountability matters. If we accept spin over substance, we give up our right to expect better." She didn't raise her voice, didn't try to match the theatrics that had defined so much of modern political television. Instead, she anchored her words in the same principle that had guided her from courtroom to Congress. Precision is power. "Public service isn't about how well you perform on camera," she continued. "It's about whether the people you serve can trust that the decisions you make aren't serving yourself first." Her gaze swept the studio, as if inviting every viewer to weigh those words for themselves. Don't take anyone's narrative, not mine, not hers, not theirs, without checking the paper trail. See what was signed, what was funded, what was delivered. That's where the truth lives. A brief pause allowed the weight of that challenge to settle in. "If someone asks for your trust, ask them for proof," Crockett said. "And if they can't give it to you, they haven't earned it." The control room fed in the slow replay, the moment the manila folder slid across the glossy studio table. The shot lingered on the gold clasp, the edges worn from use, the silent implication that inside were more pages than anyone had yet seen. No shouting, no chaos. Just the transfer of something undeniable from one set of hands to another. Her voice returned over the image. "We are told to believe in the power of democracy. I believe in it too. But democracy without accountability is just theater, and theater won't pay your rent, lower your healthcare costs, or protect your rights. It's not enough to have access to the ballot. We need access to the truth, and the will to act on it." The studio lights dimmed slightly, centering her in the frame. If you care about your future, don't just listen for the loudest voice. Listen for the one that brings the receipts. Ask the questions others are too comfortable to ask. Share the stories that force real answers. She leaned back at last, a signal that the message was complete. "Because the truth," she said, "doesn't need my volume. It speaks for itself." The closing text faded in as her final words echoed. "Read the platform, then the appropriations. Share this breakdown so strategy talks become strategy shifts." Then, the last image, that folder, resting on the table under the studio lights, as if daring someone, anyone, to open it and face what was inside.